Jeff Bezos was not always the man the world now calls the richest alive before the headlines about centibillionaire wealth, before the launch of rockets into space, and before the luxury yachts that became floating palaces. He was simply a man obsessed with building something larger than himself. And when Amazon began as nothing more than an online bookstore, few could have imagined the empire it would one day become. But alongside that rise came a parallel story, one that would eventually captivate and scandalize the world, the story of Lauren Sánchez, a woman whose life path from modest beginnings in Albuquerque to the arm of Jeff Bezos would become one of the most dissected narratives in modern celebrity culture, because at the heart of this saga lies a question as old as power itself. Is it love, or is it strategy? Is it destiny, or is it design? Lauren did not step into the world of billionaires by accident. She was born into a working-class Mexican-American family, and while her surroundings were humble, her ambitions were not from the earliest days. Those who knew her described her as fiercely driven, unwilling to accept a quiet life, and determined to carve a name for herself by any means necessary that ambition carried. Her into journalism starting at local stations, where her charisma made her stand out from the beginning, at Fox 11 and Good Day LA. She learned quickly that television was more than reading a teleprompter. It was about owning the room, captivating viewers and crafting an image, and Lauren mastered that craft, but television was only the beginning. She pivoted into aerial cinematography, founding Black Ops Aviation, a company that combined her daring love for flying with Hollywood's endless need for spectacle. Suddenly, she was no longer just a news anchor. She was a businesswoman, a pilot, and a figure who thrived at the crossroads of media, entertainment, and ambition. This multifaceted persona is what would later catch the eye of Jeff Bezos, because while the world saw a glamorous anchor turned entrepreneur, Bezos saw something else, someone who mirrored his own obsession with scale and vision. Their crossing of paths would ignite a relationship that exploded into public view, faster than either could control what began as whispers of a secret romance turned into the scandal of the year, as tabloids revealed leaked texts and rumors that Lauren herself had confided in friends the richest man in the world was in love. And the world wanted every detail. It was no ordinary relationship. It was the collision of two carefully constructed empires. Bezos, the quiet yet relentless builder of Amazon and Blue Origin; Lauren, the media-savvy pilot who knew how to command attention together. They were unstoppable. At least for a while, their romance turned into a spectacle, played out across yachts, red carpets, and global conferences. The couple seemed untouchable, embodying a new vision of a modern power duo. But beneath the polished smiles and flawless PR appearances, something else was stirring, because power couples attract not only admiration but also scrutiny. And Lauren, who had always been skilled at controlling her own narrative, now found herself the subject of narratives she could not control. Every Instagram post, every public appearance, every leaked rumor became fuel for a media machine, hungry to either crown her as a queen or expose her as a pretender. And that duality would define the next stage of her life. Her rise was meteoric, but meteors burn bright before they fall. And as her relationship with Bezos became more visible, the cracks began to show. Her social media presence slowed her once constant updates, halted her public appearances, seemed calculated, and rumors of strain began to spread. Insiders whispered of conflicts, NDAs, and betrayals, and suddenly the glamour turned to silence. And silence in the world of fame speaks louder than words. This was the calm before the storm. The moment when the empire she had built so carefully began to wobble. A woman who had once turned helicopters into cinematic tools now found herself unable to control the very spotlight she had once courted. And from that silence came the first hints of legal battles that would escalate into one of the most explosive celebrity sagas of modern times. What had begun as the fairy tale of a billionaire and his glamorous partner was about to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. What followed after the whispers became headlines was a media storm. Unlike anything Lauren Sánchez had faced before, because while she was no stranger to cameras, she was now in the orbit of the richest man in the world. And that meant the coverage was relentless. Paparazzi trailed her steps. Tabloids speculated on her motives. Television hosts debated whether she was the love of Bezos' life or the architect of a carefully calculated move into the billionaire class, and Lauren played the part with precision. Every outfit, every appearance, every smile seemed designed to send a message. She was not a mistress in hiding. She was a partner in power. Soon she was standing beside Bezos at climate summits and space launches, sitting front row at galas, mingling with royalty and political leaders, and yet the higher she rose, the louder the doubts became. Because the world is rarely forgiving when someone ascends too quickly. Critics dissected her past relationships, her career, pivots, her every word and gesture. Some framed her as a trailblazer, a woman who had fought her way into elite circles. Others painted her as opportunistic, a symbol of ambition without limits. And Bezos himself seemed unfazed, at least publicly, continuing to expand his empire while embracing this new chapter of his life. But behind the polished images, the pressure mounted. The leaked texts that had first revealed their relationship became weapons for gossip outlets. Insiders hinted at trust issues, NDAs, and strained negotiations within Bezos's inner circle, and slowly the sheen of perfection began to crack. Even as they sailed on $500 million yachts or danced at Venetian palaces, a shadow followed them because every grand display invited questions. Was it love or performance? Was it passion or power? The silence from Lauren's social media only deepened the intrigue. Fans who once scrolled through a curated feed of designer gowns, helicopters, and glamorous parties now found only pauses and absences. And in the world of influence, silence is never neutral. It suggested control. It suggested something was being hidden. And as the story evolved, whispers of legal entanglements, financial disputes, and looming conflicts began to leak into the press. Lauren, who had once shaped her own narrative, now found herself at the mercy of narratives written by others. Her charisma, once her greatest weapon, seemed to vanish into carefully measured expressions at public events. Gone were the unfiltered laughs, the casual posts, the playful interviews. In their place was a mask, polished but rigid, and the public could feel it. The fascination with her story shifted from admiration to suspicion, and suspicion in the age of social media spreads faster than fact. Every blog, every podcast, every headline layered speculation upon speculation, until the line between truth and rumor blurred beyond recognition. And yet through it all, Bezos remained largely silent. His presence beside her, steady but unreadable. Was he her protector? Or was he watching from a distance as the narrative spun out of control? No one knew, but everyone speculated. And in that speculation, Lauren's story grew larger than life, her rise now set. The stage for what would become one of the most dramatic downfalls the public had ever seen, because ambition unchecked is a flame, and flames burn brightest before they consume everything around them. As the months stretched on, the image that Lauren Sanchez had worked so tirelessly to curate began to shimmer like a mirage, because while the photographs still showed her stepping off yachts draped in diamonds, attending banquets with royalty, and standing beside Jeff Bezos at events designed to dazzle the public, there was an undeniable shift in the energy that surrounded her, and people noticed it in whispers. At first, subtle observations shared on gossip blogs and podcast commentaries that wondered aloud why the once effervescent Lauren had become so controlled, so deliberate, so silent on social media, because silence in the digital age is never neutral. It is an act. It is a choice. And when someone who once posted endlessly about designer gowns, helicopter rides, and behind the scenes glimpses of glamour suddenly retreats into curated stillness, that silence begins to tell its own story. Some interpreted it as strength, others as calculation, but for the public it sparked questions, and curiosity always demands answers. The more Lauren retreated, the louder the outside world became. Speculation filled the void, whispers about arguments, whispers about NDAs, whispers about texts that revealed more than either Bezos or Lauren wanted the world to see. Insiders suggested there were cracks in the foundation, cracks hidden beneath the glossy magazine spreads and the choreographed entrances on red carpets. This was the paradox of fame. When you are most visible, you are also most vulnerable, because the public feels entitled to your story, and if you do not give them one, they will write one for you. And so the narrative of Lauren Sánchez began to mutate. Once she was the glamorous television anchor, turned daring helicopter pilot, turned entrepreneur who captured the heart of the richest man in the world. Now she was painted as a woman whose ambition might have carried her too far. A woman whose silence felt like strategy rather than serenity, and every photograph became evidence. The tilt of her smile, the grip of Bezos's hand, the way her eyes avoided the cameras were interpreted as signals, and in that constant interpretation, she lost control of her own narrative. The woman who once bent media to her will now found herself bent. Media to her will now found herself bent beneath it, The public fascination deepened because this was no longer just a love story. This was a fable in the making. Ambition, glamour, betrayal, and silence wrapped in a single figure and in the telling. Of that fable, questions began to sharpen. Was Lauren simply a woman in love? Or was she an operator of extraordinary skill who had maneuvered herself into the center of power, only to discover that power comes with consequences that even the most carefully laid plans cannot contain? The story gathered momentum. Each yacht trip dissected, each gala appearance analyzed, each absence noted like clues in a mystery that the world was desperate to solve. And through it all, Bezos remained largely silent, his expression inscrutable, his presence constant but unreadable. Was he her shield, or was he watching from a distance as the empire they had built together in public began to shift in the shadows? No one knew, but everyone speculated, and that speculation was enough to feed the machine. The silence that had once seemed like Lauren Sanchez's shield soon became the very drumbeat of her unraveling, because silence in the world of billionaires is rarely a coincidence, and those who live in the public eye know too well that retreating from the spotlight often means the spotlight follows you even closer, more ravenous, more unforgiving than before. So when Lauren, who once flooded her followers with curated snapshots of luxury, helicopters and couture gowns, slowed her feed to a trickle, the effect was immediate. Speculation surged. The tabloids did not need words from her. They had the power of imagination. The gossip podcasts did not need official statements. They had tone and timing to dissect. And in the absence of a story, they created one for her. The glamorous partner of the richest man alive was suddenly being recast as a woman under fire. Whispers of NDAs, whispers of conflicts, whispers of texts that carried weight far beyond the intimacy they once held. Insiders hinted at breaches of trust, documents passed between lawyers and private investigators, rumors that behind the golden curtain of the Bezos-Sanchez romance, there were power struggles tugging at the seams of the carefully woven narrative. This was not merely a story of love or betrayal. It was a story about perception, about how empires rise and fall, not by what they truly are, but by what people believe them to be. And once the whispers began, they could not be stopped soon. Even the grandest displays of wealth seemed different. The $500 million yacht, once celebrated as the crown jewel of indulgence, began to look like an ark, built not for pleasure but for escape. The lavish parties began to feel like theater-scripted performances for a skeptical audience. And the more Bezos remained publicly silent, the more the world began to wonder, was he distancing himself, or was he complicit in the spectacle? The ambiguity was the oxygen. The media craved. Every still photograph became a clue. Every absence became a signal. Every rumor became a headline, and Lauren's once shimmering image became distorted by the weight of narratives she could not control. And in that distortion, the eye cracks grew wider, because when an identity is built on perfection, any fracture becomes a collapse. People began to revisit her past, not with admiration, but with suspicion. They analyzed her rise from Albuquerque to Los Angeles. They examined her career pivots, her relationships, her ambition, and painted it all in a new light. Ambition that once looked inspiring now looked calculating. Drive that once seemed admirable now seemed predatory. Her transformation into the woman who stood beside Bezos became reframed not as fate but as strategy, a master plan carefully executed step by step. And once the public begins to see someone as a strategist of hearts, the romance evaporates, leaving only chess pieces on the board. And Lauren became the queen everyone believed was moving diagonally toward the throne. And the queen in this story found herself surrounded not by loyal subjects, but by critics circling like vultures, because the higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. And whispers turned to headlines, and headlines turned to narratives, and the silence that once shielded her became the proof people thought they needed, proof that something was being hidden, proof that the perfect image was only a facade. So as Lauren's appearances slowed and Bezos's public words about her dwindled, the speculation sharpened. Some outlets claimed financial conflicts were brewing. Others suggested power struggles within Bezos's inner circle had placed her on the defensive, and still others hinted at betrayals whispered through leaked texts passed between friends and investigators until fragments of private life became public spectacle. But what made it all more dangerous was that the public had grown accustomed to seeing them as flawless, a billionaire love story dressed in glamour and influence. So when flaws appeared, they were magnified tenfold. A simple pause in posting became an omen. A missed gala became evidence. A stiff smile on a yacht became a signal of crisis, and as the magnification intensified, Lauren, who had once commanded attention with ease, now seemed to shrink into composure. Every move calculated, every gesture. Rehearsed her charisma, which once flowed naturally, now appeared as armor polished, but heavy. And beneath that armor, the narrative of a downfall began to build. People no longer asked how she had risen, but when she would fall. And the more they asked, the more inevitable it felt. The empire of image that had lifted her so high was now shaking. Beneath the weight of scrutiny, the woman who had reinvented herself as a pilot, as an entrepreneur, as a partner in power, now found reinvention impossible because the story was writing itself, and she was no longer holding the pen. Yet even as the media swarmed, even as podcasts speculated and critics dissected, there was still something magnetic about her silence, because silence leaves room for imagination, and imagination is often more damning than truth. Every rumor became exaggerated. Every theory grew darker until whispers of NDAs morphed into speculation of courtroom battles. Whispers of strained smiles became talk of separations. Whispers of luxury excesses became framed as distractions to cover fractures. And slowly the story pivoted. From glamour to scandal, Lauren Sánchez was no longer being celebrated as a daring woman beside the richest man in the world. She was being scrutinized as a case study in ambition unchecked. And the shift was seismic, but Bezos himself remained a question mark. He was there in photographs, there in staged moments, but absent in words. His silence heavier than hers, because he had once been her shield, her validation, her partner in public. Now his silence seemed like distance and distance in. The public imagination becomes abandonment, so people asked, where was Bezos? Was he still standing behind her? Or was he letting her unravel before the world? His lack of answer became an answer, and in that ambiguity, the storm only grew stronger, until it was clear that what had begun as a romance had evolved into something else entirely. A spectacle, a cautionary tale, a slow-motion collapse unfolding on the global stage, because ambition without balance becomes gravity, and gravity always pulls down. And yet, even as the world painted her as a villain, as a schemer, as a woman who had reached too high, there remained the undeniable truth that none of it could have happened without an audience hungry to watch her rise, and now even hungrier to watch her fall, because downfall stories have always sold more than success stories. The public loves a phoenix rising, but they love the ashes even more. And Lauren became that paradox, at once admired and despised, envied and pitied, because she symbolized both desire and danger. She was the proof that ambition could carry someone from the fringes of Hollywood into the heart of a trillion-dollar empire. And at the same time, she became the reminder that no throne is ever secure, especially one built on charm and controversy. Her friends who once gushed about her now stayed quiet. Her enemies who once whispered now shouted, and the stage that had once elevated her to yacht decks in Capri and galas in Venice now felt like a trial with no judge, only millions of spectators weighing in with opinions, memes, and headlines. And through it all, Bezos remained an enigma. Some said he was simply strategic biding time before stepping forward. Others said he was pulling back deliberately, letting her take the heat, because if the storm broke her and not him, then the empire would remain intact. But to the public, perception is reality, and reality was beginning to look like a man reconsidering his choices, and a woman fighting to hold her place. In every candid shot, every sideways glance, every clipped smile became evidence of a fracture, and the speculation hardened into a belief that something was ending, that the fairy tale had an expiration date, that this was not the climax of a love story, but the unraveling of an empire built on desire. But the real question remained, who would control the ending? Because if Lauren had proven anything, it was that she was not a passive character in her own story. She was a strategist, someone who knew how to wield charm, influence, and timing to her advantage. And just when critics thought she was cornered, she would find a new angle, a new reinvention. But even reinvention has limits, and the public was beginning to ask if she had reached hers. They said the storm would destroy her. They said no one could walk away from this kind of scandal untouched, but Lauren had never been the kind of woman who let the world dictate her destiny. She had walked out of the quiet suburbs of Albuquerque into the blinding lights of Hollywood, and then into the private jet world of billionaires and heads of state. Every step forward had been called impossible until she made it real. So when the headlines turned, Venomous when the whispers became roars, she did what she had always done. She leaned into the fire, not away from it. She knew that perception could be twisted, that reputations could be reshaped, that stories could be rewritten because the truth was never what people believed, it was what they were told. And Lauren had always been a master at controlling the telling now. As cameras caught her in courtrooms, on yachts, at summits, her silence became louder than words. Because silence in scandal is not weakness, it is calculation. She knew the longer she stayed on the stage, the more the world would project its own fears and fantasies onto her. Was she a victim of love? A mastermind of seduction? A woman who outplayed the richest man alive? Or the inevitable casualty of ambition too raw to be hidden? The questions mattered more than the answers because questions kept her name alive and in the realm of power. Visibility is survival. Jeff Bezos too played his own game, withdrawing just enough to protect the empire, but never enough to sever the tie because he knew what the public did not want to admit. Lauren was more than a distraction. She was an operator. She had access to rooms and conversations that money alone could not buy. She was the link between glamour and influence, between Silicon Valley and Hollywood, between politics and the private corridors of wealth. And in that link lay her leverage. So even as her enemies celebrated too soon, even as tabloids
Carly,
predicted...
Plus, it really encourages women to get into STEM. So that's one of the organizations. And then International Dyslexia Association.
Because downfall is only real when you stop showing up. And Lauren never stopped. The backlash bruised her. The scrutiny cut her. But she wore the wounds like medals because in her world, scars are proof you fought and survived. And the more the world tried to erase her, the more she etched herself into the story. And so came the paradox. The more they hated, the more they could not look away. Because the villainess always commands the stage, and for Lauren being. The villainess was better than being forgotten. Jeff meanwhile drifted into his own rebranding, focusing on rockets, philanthropy, and legacy, but even there the shadow of Lauren followed. Because people did not see a rocket launch or a gala speech without asking what she thought, what she knew, what she planned. Their bond had become the spectacle, and the spectacle had become their prison and yet also their crown. Because what is modern power, if not constant visibility? The relationship may have cracked, may have bent under scandal, but it never shattered. Not in the way the critics expected, because whether they appeared together or apart, they remained bound by narrative, and narrative is stronger than vows, stronger than contracts. It is the glue of empires, and Lauren understood that better than anyone, the years ahead would not be easy. Court battles, the whispers, the betrayals would linger, but so would the influence. So would the wealth, so would the access, and in time history would blur the sharpness of the scandal, leaving only the myth, and myths are what endure. So when people ask how a woman from a modest home rose to the arms of the richest man alive, they will not read court filings or gossip blogs. They will remember the yachts, the diamonds, the headlines, the photographs, and they will remember Lauren not as she was, accused, but as she was seen, dazzling, untouchable, unforgettable. And that is the final victory, to live forever in the imagination of the world. Not as truth, but as legend. Because legends cannot be canceled. They can only be told and retold. And as long as her name sparks debate, her story is not over, and with that, the curtain falls on this chapter. But the stage lights remain warm, waiting for the next act, because in Hollywood, in billionaires' row, in politics, there is always a next act, and Lauren Sánchez has never been one to exit quietly. So if you think this is the end, you are wrong. This is only the end of the beginning and over.
This video covers legal allegations in a news context. All claims are from official filings and no guilt is implied until proven in court, please. Keep all discussions respectful. Allegations are not facts until proven in court.